Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. With Bitcoin hitting like $72,000 just yesterday.
72,000.
Yeah, crazy, right? I feel like we got to talk about it.
Yeah.
And all this buzz about Bitcoin and AI, it's like the perfect time to dig into the Bitcoin Standard.
Yeah.
By Saifedean Ammous. It's a book that's been getting a ton of attention lately. Even Jack Dorsey's a big fan.
It's the interesting thing is this book really argues that Bitcoin is not just like, another tech thing. It's like a return to something really fundamental.
Oh,
He calls it sound money, which is like,
okay, sound money. I'll admit that sounds a bit like Econ 101.
yeah.
What does it actually, what does it mean? Like, why should I care?
So basically, Ammous says throughout history, the most like stable and reliable forms of money, they all had certain things in common.
Yeah.
Like they were scarce, durable, portable, like you could carry it around, and fungible.
Okay.
And he thinks Bitcoin has all these things. Like, think about it. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins.
21 million.
It's built into the code, right? And that limited supply, that's like a big part of what makes it sound, in his view. It can't be like manipulated the way governments can just print more, traditional money.
So no more like printing money out of thin air, which, leads to all that inflation.
Exactly.
The whole mess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he uses this really interesting example of the Roman Empire.
Oh.
They started like debasing their currency by slowly taking out the silver from their coins. And that eventually led to hyperinflation, and like the whole empire basically collapsed.
Wow. So Bitcoin's fixed supply is like a protection against...
Yeah, it's like a safeguard against those kinds of like historical pitfalls.
I see the parallel there, but how does that translate to like my life? Like why should I be worried about sound money now?
Well, imagine you're saving for something big, right?
Yeah.
Like a house or retirement. In a system with sound money, your savings are more likely to hold their value over time. But with like the inflationary fiat currency we have now, your savings can just kind of disappear. It makes it way harder to reach your goals.
Oh, so it's about knowing that like your money won't just lose its value overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Bitcoin with the limited supply and the whole blockchain thing comes in.
Exactly. Blockchain is like the foundation of Bitcoin. It's what keeps track of all the transactions, and it makes it really, really difficult to counterfeit. So it's that combo of limited supply and a super secure system that Ammous thinks makes Bitcoin a better form of money.
Okay, that makes sense. The book also gets into like how Bitcoin could change the future of business, especially with AI, and how everything's becoming digital. I thought those chapters, money and time preference and digital money and trust, those are really interesting.
Yeah, those chapters are really about how Bitcoin could encourage businesses to think more long term, because it's designed to be stable. It theoretically encourages businesses to focus on sustainable growth instead of just chasing quick profits.
I can see how that fits with, how everyone's talking about ESG these days, environmental, social governance.
Yeah.
Companies are under so much pressure to, think about the long term, not just the next quarter.
Absolutely. And then you have digital money and trust, which is all about how Bitcoin works in a world where almost everything is digital, which is like super relevant with AI, and data-driven business models that need to exchange tons of data securely.
So how are businesses using Bitcoin and blockchain now? Like, what are some real-world examples?
We're seeing these really cool things like secure data marketplaces, like Ocean Protocol. They use blockchain so people can buy and sell data without needing like a big company to control everything. That could be huge for fields like AI research where data is everything.
So instead of relying on like Google or Amazon to control everything,
right,
we could have a system where individuals have more control over their own data?
Exactly. More decentralized and democratic.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
And what else are businesses doing with it?
Oh, tons of stuff. They're using Bitcoin for transparent supply chains.
What does that mean?
Imagine being able to track a product like from where it's made all the way to your door.
Oh.
Making sure it's ethical and no one's cheating.
Oh, wow.
Plus, they're using it for smart contracts, which are basically like self-executing contracts.
Interesting.
Yeah, pretty cool.
That sounds like it could save businesses a lot of money.
Definitely. Forbes said businesses could save like 15%.
15%.
Just by using blockchain.
Yeah.
And that's just the beginning.
So there's like a ton of excitement around Bitcoin and blockchain.
Yeah.
But is there any concern that it can't actually handle like the massive amount of data that AI needs?
Yeah, that's a good question. Scalability is like the main thing people criticize about Bitcoin. Some say it's not ready to handle like all the transactions in a global AI economy.
So it's not perfect. There are still some challenges.
Of course, but at least people are talking about it, right?
Yeah.
People
Okay.
are starting to see how decentralized technologies could change business and give more power back to individuals.
And that's where someone like Jack Dorsey comes in, right?
Mm.
He's been so vocal about Bitcoin and his vision for like a Bitcoin native internet.
Absolutely. He's brought so much attention to these ideas and started this huge debate about the future of tech and finance.
Let's dive into Dorsey's perspective and how it connects to the Bitcoin standard after a quick break.
So we're talking about Jack Dorsey and how he's like all in on Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, he's definitely a believer.
Yeah. So how does that connect to, what Ammous is saying in the Bitcoin standard?
Well, Dorsey's vision really lines up with one of the main themes in the book, which is this critique of centralized control,
Okay.
especially in finance. Ammous argues that these centralized systems, they're just too easy to manipulate and abuse.
Mm.
And he sees Bitcoin as a way to fix that because it's decentralized. And Dorsey's not just talking about it. He's actually doing stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like with his company Block and the whole Lightning Network thing.
Right. The Lightning Network that's designed to solve one of the big problems with Bitcoin scalability.
Oh, yeah, that was one of the concerns we were talking about before.
Exactly. It's like a layer on top of the main Bitcoin blockchain.
Okay.
You can think of it like a network of payment channels that makes microtransactions really fast and cheap.
So it's like a separate lane for the small stuff.
Exactly. Keeps the main Bitcoin highway clear.
I like that analogy.
It makes Bitcoin much more practical for everyday use, which is important if it's going to become a global currency like Dorsey wants.
This kind of reminds me of the whole decentralized AI thing, too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of worry about, companies like NVIDIA and Tesla having too much power.
Right. Especially when it comes to AI.
Exactly.
And Dorsey's one of the loudest voices against that. He thinks it kills innovation and limits freedom.
Yeah, I remember that tweet of his about a Bitcoin native internet back in 24.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big deal. It was like his vision for a future where people have control over their data again.
And it connects back to the Bitcoin standard, too. Ammous talks about how sound money can give people more control over their own lives because governments can't just mess with their wealth through inflation. And Dorsey's vision is kind of like applying that same idea to the internet.
It's interesting to think how these ideas about sound money and decentralization could change how AI develops.
It's a huge question.
Like, could it lead to AI that's more ethical and fair?
Yeah.
Not just controlled by a few big companies?
That's the hope. Right now, there are a lot of concerns about the risks of AI, especially if it's only controlled by a few powerful entities.
Yeah, decentralized approach where the development and control of AI is spread out more could help with that.
Yeah, potentially.
It's not just theory anymore, though, right?
Yeah.
This is all happening now.
Right.
Bitcoin's price is going crazy. Dorsey's putting his money where his mouth is, and everyone's talking about AI.
Yeah.
It feels like things are really changing.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of energy around these ideas. But it's important to remember that not everyone agrees that Bitcoin is the answer. There are still critics who point to its volatility, its energy consumption, things like that.
Yeah, it's like we said before, it's not black and white.
Exactly. There are good arguments on both sides. And even Ammous in the Bitcoin standard, he admits that there are challenges that need to be addressed if Bitcoin is going to be widely adopted.
One thing I found really interesting was that idea of time preference.
Oh, yeah.
How it connects to sound money. Ammous argues that when people trust that their money will hold its value, they start thinking more about the future.
Right, and that can lead to more sustainable business practices.
Because if businesses are thinking long-term, they're more likely to invest in things that benefit everyone, not just their profits.
Exactly. It's a win-win.
So for our listeners out there, what does it mean for them if this vision of a decentralized future actually happens? Like, how could it change their lives?
Well, it could change a lot of things, potentially. It could shift the balance of power away from big institutions and give individuals more control. It could change how we manage our money, how we get information, even how we participate in the economy.
It's exciting to think about, but also kind of scary.
Definitely. It's uncharted territory. But the Bitcoin standard gives us a way to think about these complex issues and make informed decisions.
At the end of the day, it's up to each of us to decide what role we want to play in shaping this future.
Exactly. Ammous argues that going back to sound money is essential for freedom and prosperity. But whether you agree with him or not, the book makes you think about what kind of future we want.
And how we can use these new technologies like Bitcoin and blockchain to make that future happen.
Exactly. The Bitcoin standard reminds us that we're not just along for the ride. We can actually shape this technological revolution.
Okay, so as we're wrapping up our deep dive into the Bitcoin standard, what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners? What should they be thinking about as they see these ideas in the news online, or even when they're making financial decisions?
Well, we've talked about a lot today. Everything from like the history of money to blockchain and even like a decentralized internet and this deep dive into the Bitcoin standard. It's really got me thinking about the future in a different way.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those books that sticks with you.
Yeah.
That whole argument that Ammous makes about sound money being so important for freedom and a stable economy, you know, it's powerful. And even if you don't agree with everything he says, it makes you stop and think about the systems we depend on, like financially.
Yeah, for sure. For me, it was that idea of time preference and how it connects to sound money. That was really interesting. Makes sense. If people believe their money's going to hold its value, they're going to be more likely to save and invest for the future. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's like a long-term perspective that we're missing these days. Everyone wants instant gratification and quick profits. A shift towards a sound money system, like what Ammous is talking about it, could really change how we think about value and the choices we make as individuals and as a society.
Reading this book, it made me realize just how much power is in the hands of these big institutions, both in finance and tech, and this idea of a more decentralized future. It's fascinating and kind of scary at the same time.
Yeah, it's definitely disruptive, but like we were saying, that disruption could be a good thing. It could lead to more innovation, more power for individuals, and maybe even a fairer distribution of wealth.
And it feels like all of this is so relevant right now, with Bitcoin's price going up and AI being such a big topic, and people like Jack Dorsey actually trying to build this decentralized future. It's not just a theory anymore, it's really happening.
It's a crazy time for sure. And the Bitcoin standard gives us a good way to understand what's going on, but we have to remember that the future isn't set in stone. We all have a part in shaping it.
So for our listeners, what are some questions they should be asking themselves as they learn more about these ideas? What should they think about when they see stuff about Bitcoin, blockchain, and the future of tech,
I think it's good to ask yourself some basic questions like, how do I feel about the current financial system? Do I trust these big institutions? What are the pros and cons of a decentralized world? And maybe most importantly, what kind of future do I want to help build?
Those are some big questions. The Bitcoin standard makes us think beyond just accepting the way things are and to actually get involved in creating the world we want to live in.
Yeah, it's like a call to action. It reminds us that we have more power than we think. Whether you agree with Ammous or not, it's a great resource for anyone who wants to understand how the world is changing and the choices we face.
I agree. It's a book that I'll be thinking about for a long time.
Me too. It started so many conversations, and I think they're only going to get more important in the next few years.
So on that note, we're going to wrap up our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us as we explored the Bitcoin standard. We hope it gave you some things to think about and maybe even inspired you to learn more about these topics.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep learning.
See you next time.